Autumn, 1773. The city of Boston felt like a sea suddenly stilled before a harsh winter. Calm on the surface, but deep beneath, a fierce rage and tension were boiling. The air was thick with the scent of salt, fresh pine shavings, and, most pervasive of all, the stench of resentment toward the King of England. Inside a printing press located in Boston's North End sat Josiah Reed. He was barely 21, yet his eyes held the deep contemplation of an elder, and his hands bore the calloused marks of a laborer. He was an apprentice at the Boston Gazette, the city's oldest newspaper. But he did not just arrange letters, he arranged the seeds of a revolution.
Ah, Josiah, another no taxation without representation poster? Old Master Eliakim chuckled, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. The laughter was an odd mix of affection and fear. Are you forgetting how the British redcoats beat the shopkeeper next door last month? One should think twice before printing such sedition, son. Josiah did not stop. His hands swiftly set the lead types into the letterpress. Every word felt like a tiny volcanic vent. If we think, master, who will speak? This city is an open prison now. We are taxed for every breath we take. Taxes on sugar, taxes on glass, and now tea. We Americans cannot live without tea, and His Majesty is sucking the blood out of our smallest pleasures. Master Eliakim sighed. We only print, Josiah. The fight belongs to others. The fight belongs to all of us, Josiah whispered. He remembered the Boston Massacre 4 years earlier, and how the soldiers had fired upon unarmed civilians. That memory still fueled him. In the evening, when the clang of ships dropping anchor in Boston Harbor, the distant tune of an Irish jig from a tavern, and the rhythmic beat of military boots from the British barracks merged into a single soundscape, Josiah slipped out of the press. His destination was an old public house marked by a weathered wooden sign, the Green Dragon Tavern. The Green Dragon Tavern was the beating heart of Boston's defiance. To an outsider, it seemed a cheap haunt for sailors and laborers to swill beer, but its back rooms were the sanctuary of the Sons of Liberty. The chamber tonight was dimly lit by a few oil lamps. The faces of the men gathered there told a story of silent conviction. Farmers, merchants, lawyers, and fishermen, every stratum of society had converged here. Among them was Samuel Adams. Nearing 50, his voice possessed the power of thunder. He was the main speaker of the assembly. Adams leaned over a worn map. Listen, friends, the news is confirmed. 3 tea ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, will dock in Boston Harbor by the end of the month. A 4th, the William, is right behind them. A momentary deathly silence fell over the room, followed by a tense murmur. A stout merchant, one of the city's biggest textile dealers, voiced his concern. But Adams, Governor Hutchinson has made it clear that the tea will be unloaded. Our protests are doing nothing. He has even authorized his 2 sons to sell the tea for the East India Company. This is a direct assault on our livelihoods. Precisely, sir. Adams raised a hand, calming the crowd. Governor Hutchinson, a man of Boston, now plays the king's sycophant. He is draining our vitality. If this tea is unloaded, not only will our merchant friends be ruined, but it will mean we have bowed to the royal parliament's authority. We will have accepted their right to tax us without representation. Josiah, standing in a dark corner, felt a fire ignite inside him. He thought of his own father, who had lost everything in the small tea trade due to British restrictions. Another orator, Dr. Joseph Warren, stood beside Adams. He was young and charismatic. If this tea is unloaded, the very notion of our liberty will be destroyed forever. Our children will live as slaves to the crown. Adams turned. His eyes were steady, like burning coals in the deep night. "We are left with two courses of action. Either force those ships to return, or give them a lesson that Great Britain will never forget." The meeting continued well into the night. It was decided they would apply one last pressure on Governor Hutchinson to deny the ships customs clearance and force them to sail back. But in the shadows, a more severe and final plan was being nurtured. After the assembly, Josiah and a handful of his young colleagues, all apprentices, shop workers, or dockhands, gathered in the dark alley behind the tavern. "What will we do in the end, Josiah?" asked Thomas, a sailor whose hands were rough from rope work. Josiah sighed, looking out at Boston Harbor. The moon had set, and only the sound of lapping water drifted from the docks. "If Hutchinson does not back down," Josiah said firmly, "then neither will we. They want to steal our liberty. We will take away the one thing they hold most dear, the source of their tax revenue." They knew what they were discussing was not mere protest. It was insurrection. It was treason, punishable by death. But the thirst for liberty was sharper than any fear. The next few days were an intense war of nerves for Boston. Thousands gathered at the Old South Meeting House, the largest assembly hall of the time. They pressed the governor. Day after day they waited. The ships remained anchored, their tea chests ready for unloading. But Governor Hutchinson was resolute. His message was clear: the king's command is final. The tea shall be landed. December 15th, 1773. The climax arrived. By law, if the ships did not receive customs clearance within 20 days, British forces could seize the tea and unload it by force. That 20-day deadline expired on December 16th at midnight. Josiah was leaving the printing press, heading home. As he passed a patrol of British soldiers, he overheard their low laughter. "After tomorrow, these Americans will learn to behave," one scoffed. Josiah clenched his fist. No, they would not learn to behave. They would learn to be free.
December 16, noon. More than 7,000 people packed the Old South Meeting House, the largest gathering in Boston's history. Samuel Adams, Dr. Warren, and the other leaders made a final appeal. Messengers were dispatched to get an answer from Hutchinson. The sun set. The meeting continued by the light of oil lamps. The winter cold intensified outside. Everyone waited anxiously for the governor's reply. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. The messenger returned, his face grim. Adams stared at him intently. The messenger whispered that Hutchinson had given his final word. No request can be granted. The tea shall be unloaded. A wave of deep despair washed over the hall. Cutting through the silence, Samuel Adams's voice thundered. His voice trembled slightly, but his gaze held an unbreakable resolve. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country," Adams declared in a calm yet fierce tone. From this night, we shall do all for the future of this land. Liberty shall prevail." As the words ended, a group of men outside, their faces smeared with soot and blankets draped over their bodies, let out a loud war whoop, mimicking Native Americans. It was the signal. Josiah Reed gripped the torch in his hand. His heart pounded like a revolutionary drum. There was fear, but overwhelming it was the thrill of participating in a moment that would change history. No more protest. It was time for action. Time to fulfill the vow of the Green Dragon. The American Revolution was about to begin.
The war whoop that echoed outside the Old South Meeting House was not an accidental sound. It was raw, primal, and utterly electrifying. It cut through the despair in the assembly hall like a bolt of lightning. transforming 7,000 despondent colonists into a unified, roaring mob of defiance. Josiah Reed did not wait. The second the cry erupted, he pushed through the throng, following the surge of adrenaline in bodies heading for the back streets. In a deserted corner near the wharves, away from the immediate gaze of the redcoat patrols, the transformation began. The air was cold, but the intensity of the moment made him sweat. Josiah quickly pulled the blanket, previously concealed beneath his coat, over his shoulders. He rubbed soot from a nearby chimney onto his face and hands, smearing it until his pale features were unrecognizable in the gloom. He tied a few rough feathers into his hat, completing the hasty disguise of a Mohawk Indian. This was not merely a costume, it was symbolism. By disguising themselves as Native Americans, the Sons of Liberty sought two goals: anonymity to protect them from treason charges, and a political message. They were not Englishmen acting within the Crown's laws, but independent Americans acting on their own land. Thomas, the sailor from the Green Dragon meeting, appeared beside Josiah, breathing heavily. He carried a small, heavy axe handle. "Are you ready to printer?" Thomas asked, his voice rough. "Ready to taste freedom, sailor," Josiah replied, gripping the hatchet he had borrowed from the press shop. The group was divided into 3 companies, each targeting one of the 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, or the Beaver, docked at Griffin's Wharf. Josiah, Thomas, and their small band were assigned to the Dartmouth, the first vessel to arrive with the hated cargo. The march through the cobblestone streets was fast and silent, guided by whispers in the pale light of distant street lamps. They moved like shadows, avoiding the regular patrols of soldiers and the king's customs officials. The silence of the 150 participants was broken only by the rhythmic crunch of their boots and the muffled clang of their hatchets hitting their legs. As they approached Griffin's Wharf, the scene was eerily still. 200 yards away, the 3 dark silhouettes of the ships sat low in the water, heavy with the weight of 342 chests of tea. A crowd of thousands, the very people who had been at the Old South Meeting House, lined the docks, standing in silent vigil, acting as an impenetrable wall between the activists and the British forces. The leaders, including the legendary Paul Revere, were already on the wharf, organizing the 3 teams. They emphasized the rules: no looting, no harm to the crew, and absolute destruction of the tea only. Josiah clambered aboard the Dartmouth. The ship's captain, a man named Francis Rock, and his skeleton crew were stunned into inaction. They had been warned by Governor Hutchinson to expect trouble, but not an organized, disciplined assault led by Indians. A masked leader, whom Josiah recognized as an esteemed Boston merchant, politely but firmly addressed Captain Roch. "Captain, you have nothing to fear if you stand aside. We mean no harm to you or your vessel. Our quarrel is not with the shipping, but with the poison in the hold. This tea shall not be landed." Captain Roch, seeing the sheer number of determined men and the axes they carried, wisely chose discretion. He and his crew were ushered safely into the cabin, under guard. The work began immediately. "To the hatches!" the leader barked. Josiah found himself struggling with the heavy wooden hatches that sealed the ship's main hold. The air was frigid, making the wood slick and unforgiving. Finally, with a grunt of effort from a dozen men, the hatches were thrown back, revealing the dark, cavernous interior below. Lanterns were lowered, and the sight that greeted them was staggering. Hundreds of massive, wood-bound chests, each labeled with the mark of the East India Company, stacked high and heavy. Each chest contained hundreds of pounds of bohea, Congo, Souchong, and Hyson tea, the commodity that symbolized royal oppression. Thomas, the sailor from the Green Dragon meeting, appeared beside Josiah, breathing heavily. "Haul them up, lads, and quickly!"
The work was brutal and backbreaking. The chests weighed nearly 400 pounds each. Using ropes and tackles, they hoisted the chests onto the deck. The men worked in a frenzy of focused energy, their soot-stained faces grim and determined. As soon as a chest was secured on deck, the demolition began. Josiah raised his borrowed hatchet. He brought it down with a vicious, satisfying crack against the sturdy wooden side of the first chest. The wood splintered, and the inner lining of canvas and lead foil was ripped open. The rich, slightly bitter scent of dried tea leaves exploded into the cold night air, mixing with the metallic tang of salt water. This was not the sweet aroma of a pleasant beverage. It was the smell of defiance. Crack! Thwack! The sound of splintering wood echoed across the silent harbor. Josiah grabbed the chest, tilting it over the rail. The black leaves tumbled out in a thick, dark sheet, vanishing into the murky, freezing water of the harbor. The tide was ebbing, ensuring the entire cargo would be carried out to sea. It was a systematic act of destruction. Chest after chest was hauled up, smashed open, and emptied into the sea. The men were careful, meticulous, and focused. They even swept the decks afterward, ensuring that no damage was done to the ship's property, save for the tea itself. They did not steal a single box or harm any other cargo. They were making a purely political statement. Hours passed. The sky remained dark, illuminated only by the lanterns on the deck and the distant lights of British ships anchored nearby. Yet strangely, no British soldiers intervened. General Gage, commanding the garrison, had been warned, but he was hesitant to send his troops into a massive, angry crowd, especially when the damage was only to property, albeit the Crown's property. He feared sparking a full-scale riot worse than the Boston Massacre. Finally, just before the first hint of dawn, the last chest was smashed and emptied. 3 hours of relentless, silent work across the 3 ships had ended. The air was thick with the strange, damp scent of ruined tea. Josiah leaned against the mast, exhausted, his arms aching, his hands raw from the cold and the hatchet work. He looked at the water below. The dark, swirling mass of tea leaves was a visible stain on the harbor, but to him, it was a beautiful canvas of rebellion. The leader of the Dartmouth group checked their ranks. All accounted for. Remember, lads, not a word of this to anyone. We are simply citizens who went home early. As Josiah stepped back onto the wharf, he joined the silent stream of men disappearing back into the winding lanes of Boston. The crowd that had witnessed the event had also dispersed, leaving only the cold wind and the lapping of the harbor waves. They had done it. They had destroyed 92,000 pounds of tea, worth nearly 10,000 pounds, a staggering sum. It was an act of economic and political violence that had crossed the line from protest to revolution. Josiah pulled the soot-stained blanket off his shoulders, letting it fall onto the wet cobblestones. He walked toward the nascent light of dawn, knowing the world he had left behind hours earlier was gone forever. The cost would be unimaginable, but for now, the taste of liberty was sweeter than any cup of tea. The question now was, how would the king react?
The dawn of December 17, 1773, broke over Boston with an unsettling clarity. The harbor, normally a bustling artery of trade, was still, the water dark and stained with the residue of thousands of pounds of tea. The air, though cold, carried a lingering, faint aroma of cheap Chinese leaves, the ghostly evidence of the night's treason. Josiah Reed woke in his small room above the press, every muscle in his body protesting. His hands were raw, and his throat was dry from the soot and the cold. He had shed his disguise miles from the wharf, burying the borrowed hatchet in a woodpile. Now he was simply Josiah Reed, the young apprentice. He went to work, his composure a practiced mask. The city hummed with a nervous energy. The Loyalists were horrified, calling the act the highest insult ever offered to the crown. The Patriots, however, walked with a barely contained pride. They spoke in hushed tones, trading rumors and marveling at the audacity of the Indians. The silence from the British garrison was the most terrifying element. It was the silence of a coiled snake. Within days, the printing press was churning out news, not of the perpetrators, who remained unnamed, but of the consequences. Josiah set the type for a new edition of the Gazette, his hands trembling as he read the lead story. Governor Hutchinson had fled to Castle William for his safety, and General Gage's troops had begun subtle but unmistakable steps to tighten their grip on the city. The thunder from across the Atlantic. The news of the destruction of the tea took weeks to cross the Atlantic, riding the frigid winter waves. When the dispatches finally reached London in late January 1774, the reaction was not merely anger, it was apoplexy. In the opulent halls of Westminster, the members of Parliament and the King's ministers were utterly stunned by the sheer scale of colonial effrontery. This was no petition, no polite refusal to pay a stamp tax. This was a blatant, physical act of rebellion against the economic might of the East India Company and the sovereignty of the Crown. King George III, a man who viewed his reign with a rigid sense of divine duty, took the news as a personal affront. Standing before his ministers, his face flushed a dangerous crimson, he declared the colonists, particularly those in Boston, must be taught a definitive lesson. "The die is now cast," he cried. "The colonies must either submit or triumph." Lord North, the Prime Minister, a politician known for his steady, if sometimes unimaginative hand, was tasked with delivering the punishment. He argued to Parliament that if they did not respond with overwhelming force, the entire American empire would crumble. "We are now at the crossroads," he proclaimed. "We must punish the whole town of Boston, which ever since the accession of His Majesty's family has been in a perpetual state of resistance." The intolerable acts, Boston in chains.
For Josiah, the intolerable acts felt like the tightening of a noose around his neck. The Boston Port Act, March 1774. This was the most devastating blow. The act shut down Boston Harbor entirely, effective June 1st, cutting off all commerce, trade, and lifeline to the city until the tea was paid for. For a maritime city like Boston, this meant economic death. The wharves where Josiah and Thomas had destroyed the tea were now ghostly and silent, guarded by British warships anchored menacingly offshore. The Massachusetts Government Act virtually dissolved the colonial government. Town meetings, the bedrock of local liberty, were severely restricted, and the king's governor was given power to appoint all officials, replacing elected ones. Liberty was replaced by absolute martial law. The Administration of Justice Act, dubbed the Murder Act by the colonists, this allowed British officials accused of crimes in the colonies to be tried in Great Britain or another colony, guaranteeing them immunity from local justice. The Quartering Act, this was a painful reminder of their subjugation. It mandated that British troops be quartered in colonial homes and buildings, often without the consent of the inhabitants. General Thomas Gage was appointed the new royal governor of Massachusetts. He arrived with 4 additional regiments of redcoats, transforming Boston from a troubled colonial capital into a military fortress. Soldiers were everywhere, guarding the presses, patrolling the streets, and setting up camp on the Boston Common. The chain reaction, unity across the colonies. London's strategy of isolating Boston failed spectacularly. Instead of crippling Massachusetts, The severity of the intolerable acts served as a terrifying warning to the other 12 colonies. They saw Boston's fate as their own, realizing that if the king could so easily revoke the rights and economic life of one major colony, he could do it to them all. News traveled fast along the colonial post roads, amplified by patriots like Paul Revere, who rode tirelessly to spread the word. In Virginia, George Washington called the acts an invasion of our rights and privileges. In Philadelphia, citizens sent supplies overland to aid the now starving families in Boston, accompanied by declarations of solidarity. The cause of Boston is the cause of all America. Josiah, back at the Gazette, now printed news of this unity. He set the type for every shipment of flour sent from the Carolinas, every barrel of salted pork from New York. These acts of generosity proved that the king had not isolated Boston. He had forged the first link in a chain that bound the colonies together. By the summer of 1774, the collective alarm led to a monumental decision, a joint meeting of delegates from every colony, except Georgia, to formulate a unified response. The First Continental Congress was called to convene in Philadelphia in September 1774. The price of sedition. The immediate danger fell on Josiah and the others. As General Gage's soldiers searched for those responsible for the tea destruction, the Sons of Liberty moved deeper underground. Thomas, the sailor, had to flee Boston, taking work on a fishing schooner out of Marblehead, fearing arrest. Josiah, protected by the anonymous nature of the press shop, remained. But every night, as he walked home past the growing military encampments, he could hear the sound of the king's men setting up tents, stacking their muskets, and drilling on the Boston Common. One evening, Master Eliakim received a harsh official notice. Any publication deemed seditious would result in the immediate closure of the press and the imprisonment of all involved. The notice was signed by Governor Gage himself. Eliakim looked at Josiah, his face pale and drawn. "We can't stop printing the truth, Josiah, but we must be careful. We are now printing under the shadow of the gallows." Josiah looked at the bold headline they were about to set, "A Call for Congress." He knew the time for careful protest was over. The intolerable acts had replaced debate with confrontation. The only question remaining was when and where the first shot would be fired. They had thrown the tea into the sea, but in return, the king had thrown the colonies into rebellion.
The winter of 1774-1775 was a time of grinding poverty and suffocating oppression in Boston. The closure of the harbor had choked the life out of the city. Josiah Reed, along with every other patriot, felt the iron fist of General Gage's military regime tighten daily. The press shop, while still running, was constantly scrutinized by redcoats looking for seditious material. Josiah's role had shifted. He was no longer just a printer's apprentice. He was a vital cog in the clandestine network known as the Sons of Liberty. While the delegates convened in the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia, forming militias and non-importation agreements, Josiah helped coordinate the Committee of Observation and Safety in Boston. His new dangerous task was intelligence. He moved through the crowded streets, now slick with winter thaw, watching the movements of the British troops. Every change in a watch schedule, every new shipment of supplies, every rumor from the barracks found its way back to Dr. Joseph Warren and Paul Revere. The rise of the Minutemen. Outside Boston, the tension was being channeled into preparation. The Massachusetts countryside, fueled by the solidarity and fear generated by the intolerable acts, was arming itself. Farmers, blacksmiths, and tradesmen, the common folk, were organized into militias, swearing to be ready for action at a minute's notice, the Minutemen.
They secretly stockpiled cannons, muskets, and gunpowder in towns like Concord and Worcester. Josiah's friend, Thomas, who had fled to Marblehead, wrote to him of endless drilling and target practice. "We have traded our fishing nets for muskets, Josiah. We await only the signal." The signal was imminent. General Gage, under direct pressure from London, received uncompromising orders. He must dismantle the rebellion by arresting its leaders, Samuel Adams and Hancock, who were staying in Lexington, and seize the large cache of arms stored in Concord. The warning: 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. April 18, 1775. The air was thick with expectation. Josiah had spent the day near the wharves, observing the British movements with acute suspicion. He noted that the redcoats were readying their longboats in the back channels of the harbor, a sign they planned to move by sea rather than across the narrow Boston Neck, which was guarded by colonial sympathizers. He rushed his information to Dr. Warren. The plan, hatched weeks ago, was now initiated. That evening, Paul Revere, the silversmith and messenger, stood ready. The signal was to be given from the steeple of the Old North Church, 1 lantern if the British marched by land, and 2 lanterns if they rowed across the water. Josiah watched from a distance as 2 patriots stealthily climbed the towering steeple. Moments later, 2 clear, sharp points of light pierced the night sky, hanging above the dense, dark city. 2 if by sea. The network sprang into action. Revere and William Dawes set off on their legendary rides, racing through the countryside to warn Adams, Hancock, and the Minutemen that the redcoats were on the march. Josiah's task was simpler but equally vital. He had to ensure the city's key leaders knew the plan had been launched, and he had to keep an eye on Gage's headquarters. As he moved through the darkness, he heard the muffled splash of oars as the British troops were ferried across the Charles River toward the marshy terrain that would lead them to Lexington.
The night was a whirlwind of frantic, silent activity for the Patriots, and a determined, arduous march for the British. By the first light of dawn on April 19, 1775, the exhausted column of redcoats marched into the small, sleepy village of Lexington. They were met by a line of about 70 Minutemen, hastily assembled on the village green. Among them were farmers and boys, facing the might of the world's greatest military. The British commander, Major John Pitcairn, rode up, furious that his element of surprise had been lost. He ordered the Minutemen to disperse. They stood their ground. Tension was stretched past the breaking point. Shouts were exchanged, and then, in the confusion, a single shot rang out. It was the shot that would define a century, the shot heard round the world. Suddenly, the disciplined British line opened fire, unleashing a devastating volley. When the smoke cleared, 8 Minutemen lay dead, and several more were wounded. The rest scattered. The British cheered their small, brutal victory and marched on to Concord. Concord and the birth of a nation. When the British reached Concord, they searched for the arms cache. The Minutemen, now reinforced and enraged by the bloodshed in Lexington, were waiting for them at the North Bridge. This time, the Americans did not stand on the green like a target. They met the British with organized fire. A brief, fierce fight ensued. The redcoats, realizing they were vastly outnumbered by the swelling ranks of colonial militia, began a desperate retreat back toward Boston. The retreat was a massacre. The road from Concord to Boston became an 18-mile-long gauntlet of terror. Thousands of Minutemen, hiding behind walls, trees, and buildings, fired relentlessly upon the exposed British column. The redcoats, exhausted and disorganized, suffered heavy casualties. Back in Boston, Josiah watched from the rooftops as the remnants of the king's force stumbled back into the city, bloody,
beaten and shell-shocked. The disciplined soldiers who had swaggered through Boston streets were now a broken, ragged force. The Tea Party, intended as a protest, had led to the intolerable acts, which, in turn, had ignited the flames of war. The American Revolution had begun. Josiah, standing beside Master Eliakim, looked over the besieged city. The harbor was still closed, but the purpose was clear. No one was going home, and no one was backing down. The era of protest was over. The fight for freedom had just begun. A long, brutal war sparked by a handful of tea leaves thrown into a frozen harbor one cold December night.